Well, hello and welcome to The Point. My name's David Playable, I'm the Minister here, and it's great to welcome you here, either watching on the internet at home or being there at 9 o'clock or 4 o'clock at Hexham Primary School. For the next 3 weeks, as we continue our series on transformation, we're going to look at an interlinked story of three people: Ruth, Naomi and Boaz. This is from way back in the Old Testament, and we'll be looking at how their story shows the love of God, but also prefigures something of the love of Jesus. So, I hope you enjoyed today. I hope you find it interesting. Don't forget that all our videos going back can be seen at www.thepoint.life, and we'll crack on with the first story, or the first part of the first person we're looking at in the story of Ruth. So the story begins in Bethlehem, which is just near Jerusalem in the middle of your picture, and with a woman called Naomi. And she has a husband and 2 sons, but there is a famine in the land, so they go to Moab, which is just the right of the Dead Sea there, and on that side, in the kingdom of Moab, there is food, so they go there, and they stay there a while, 10 years in fact, but unfortunately during that time, Naomi's husband dies, her 2 sons get married, but both the sons die, and the 2 daughters-in-law have no husbands. So we're left with Naomi, who's the original mother, Ruth, the daughter-in-law, and Orpah, the daughter-in-law. News comes that there's food back in Bethlehem, and Naomi thinks there's nothing left in Moab for her, so she says she will go home. And she tells her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, to go back to their people, but they say, no, we want to come with you. But Naomi insists, and Orpah does go back to her own people, but Ruth says, no, I will stay with you. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And that's a big deal, because the Moabites were traditionally the enemies of the Israelites and had a very different religious setup, which included child sacrifice. So for her to say, I will follow you, and your God will become my God, is a big deal. They go back to Bethlehem, and while they're there, they have to decide how they're going to provide for themselves. Because even though there's food in Bethlehem, they have no livelihood. So Ruth decides, Naomi tells Ruth to go and glean in the fields, and poor people are allowed to follow the harvesters and pick up what was left. And Ruth goes to the field to pick up some food for Naomi, which is where we get to our Bible reading. Ruth is gleaning in the field of a man called Boaz. Ruth chapter 2 verses 5 to 9. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? I'm not sure I can quite give it the justice it deserves. I don't know whether he said, who does that young woman belong to? Or who does that young woman belong to? But clearly he notices her. The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. Now this clearly impresses Boaz, because she is gleaning not for herself, but she's actually gleaning for Naomi, and she's working really hard. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. So Boaz is looking after Ruth very well here. A woman on her own gleaning would be very vulnerable. And yet Boaz is saying, anybody who causes trouble with her will be answerable to me, and make sure she gets to drink from the water as well. Because on a hot day, it will be very hard to work without water, and yet she would have no privileges whatsoever. At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favour in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favour in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. Those of you who are very familiar with the Bible will remember the story of the prodigal son, which Jesus told. In the story of the prodigal son, he goes away and he realises that the servants back at home have more than he has, where he's in a complete mess in his life. And he goes back and he says, I'd rather be a servant than be a son again because of the mess I've made in my life. And in the prodigal son story, the father says, no, come back as a son. And here's a similar sort of story where, as we'll see next week and the week after, what happens next in the story is that Ruth is eventually married to Boaz after a few difficult times, and she has a son and a grandson and ends up being an ancestor of King David and therefore an ancestor of Jesus. Because you remember that Naomi came from Bethlehem, which is a town we know well in the Christmas story. So you can see that in this bit, Ruth is grateful to Boaz for all he has done for her, and he shows his grace and love to her. The mother of Boaz was Rahab, who was another foreigner, so perhaps that's why he was so gracious. But why was it that Ruth was the one who was specially blessed? And what was it about her that meant that happened? Which brings me to my questions. Number one of the many qualities that Ruth has is loyalty. When you think of loyalty, what comes to mind? What are the words that you would use to describe somebody who is loyal? What are the things about it that make you think about loyalty? Number two, one of the attributes of Ruth is that everybody notices her. I think it's very amusing that Boaz says, who is that woman? To which the supervisor could have said, oh, I've no idea. Don't know who she's told. He says, oh, well, what it is she's a Moabitess and she's been doing this and she's only worked hard all day and she's only taken a rest once in that shelter over there. So clearly everybody notices who Ruth is and what she does. So our question is, should people notice what Christians do? Are we, as Christians, being observed? If you're not yet a Christian, do you look at Christians and think, do you think, ooh, if that's what Christians are like, then I don't want to be one? Or do you think they've got something that I haven't? So is it fair that people should notice what Christians do? And number three is a very old-fashioned term called divine providence. What do you think of divine providence? And that's the idea that God provides and produces things in our lives which lead us in new directions. Now, one reading of the book of Ruth is that it's full of divine providence, that she goes to the field and it just happens to be the field of Boaz. And then she eats with Boaz and it just happens and it works out that they end up getting married, and it's all about divine providence. Another reading of the story is that Ruth, by her character and by being in the right place at the right time, is worthy to be chosen. So is divine providence just God working arbitrarily in our lives, or is it us being ready to act? Now, whether you're a Christian or not, you can probably answer 1 and 2. You can probably have a go at 3 as well. So if you're at the point, then find yourself a chair, sit yourselves down, get yourself a cup of coffee or tea, and discuss that on your table. If you're at home watching this on the internet, then you too can get yourself a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you like, and have a think about that, and we'll come back to you in a minute. Ruth's transformation is from being an outsider, a foreigner, into being at the heart of the biblical account. But she's not the only one who's transformed in this story. Next week we'll look at Naomi, and the week after we'll look at Boaz. But for now, here's my takeaways for this week, and then I'll ask the person in charge to say the final prayers. So what do we learn from Ruth? Well, number 1, she was loyal, kind and hard-working, and it was those good qualities that were recognised in her by Boaz. If she hadn't had those qualities, she wouldn't have been recognised in the same way. So having the right sort of attitude to start with is so helpful. But number two, she stepped out in faith. She stepped out in faith in following Naomi. She stepped out in faith of going into the fields, which could have been quite dangerous. She stepped out in faith in marrying Boaz. All those things, she was ready to do something and act. And number three, trusting God. It's difficult for Ruth because she hasn't had the background. This is all new to her. This is something which she hasn't had before. But by trusting in God and by following Naomi's guidance, amazing things happened and her life was transformed. So, this week I hope your life will continue to be transformed, and we'll see you next Sunday.